right, good morning, party people. It's October 28th. Happy Saturday. I got to sleep in. So sorry this is late. And we'll see if my diabolical plan works. I'm going to try and not use the J word, Jesus, or mention the New Testament books that I'm actually focusing on this morning. I think I'm going to put the word apple. So we'll see if I'm successful because I'm getting shadow banned whenever we mentioned the New Testament books. Okay, so this morning it's very exciting. We're starting a new book. This is the book of Luke. We'll see how far I get for this first video. But I want to give you guys a little bit of background on Luke. Well, first of all, our reading today, for those of you that are following along, we're starting Luke. So it's Luke chapters 1 and 2, Romans 7, 8. Romans is amazing too, if you guys, but it's so deep. It takes forever to read because you have to read it over and over and over. Each little piece because it's great. Revelations, of course, 13, 14, Psalms 9 through 13, and then Proverbs 26. Okay, so that's our daily reading. All right, so we're starting the book of Luke. So those of you not familiar with the book of Luke, you hear a lot of times with people that don't understand the Bible, haven't read the Bible, haven't studied the Bible, they want to immediately just say that the Bible was written by unknown people thousands of years after or hundreds of years after Christ died. And of course, none of that is true. So what we see here in the book of Luke is the book of Luke was written by a non-Jew. He also wrote the book of Acts. And what's interesting about the book of Luke is he's mentioned in other books of the New Testament. So let me just share that with you real quick. He's mentioned in Colossians 4:14. He's called the beloved physician, and as it's mentioned and as it's known throughout the New Testament, he was considered a very learned man. So this is someone who came to Christ, who came to know Jesus, and used his knowledge and his ability to write and to spread the gospel and to actually memorialize some of the information that was currently out there, but just in a different way. And so he's also mentioned in 2 Timothy 4:11 as Paul's last companion. So Paul mentions him there. So what you see is this person who was a Gentile who came to know Jesus based on, in some capacity, I'm not sure how, but he knew Paul and he traveled with Paul and he was in some of Paul's journeys. So which means that he met many of the people that are mentioned in the New Testament in the writing of Acts. And so who was Paul hanging out with? Paul hung out with Peter. So Paul was actually involved with people that were walking with Jesus and were some of Jesus's direct disciples. So and Luke was with Paul. So I'm not sure how many of those people that Luke interacted with, but there is definitely a connection. So right off the bat, you see here in the beginning of Luke, he's dedicating this book to someone who's the name of Theophilus. So it's believed that Theophilus was a Gentile, and this book, the Gospel of Luke, was written to just memorialize and to take into account all of the other writings that were currently in place and to create another orderly account of them. And so that's what you're seeing here. So it says right at the beginning, I'm going to see how much I can get through here, but it's awesome. So right at the beginning, you see in Luke, it says, "Inasmuch as many have taken into hand to set in order a narrative of those things which have been fulfilled among us, just as those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word delivered them to us, it seemed good to me also, having had perfect understanding of all things from the very first, to write to you," he's saying to Theophilus, "in orderly account, most excellent Theophilus, that you may know the certainty of those things in which you were instructed." Okay, so that very first section, 1 through 4, is full of so much detail and so much information. So right at the very beginning, it says, "Inasmuch as many have taken into hand to set in order a narrative." So he's stating there that there are many sources already, and many people have already done this, and he's just adding his to that list. Now, he's not saying that he's adding his to that list because that information is inaccurate. He's just saying that he's adding his book to the list because he feels like there needs to be more additional information from his perspective and from his understanding and from his gleaning from the sources. Again, he was very learned for that time, and he was actually able to write in High Greek. So he was able to reach people and have and have a way. There's certain groups of people that he was going to be able to reach in the Gentile world that even maybe Paul might not have been able to reach. Who knows? But so then it says, just as those who were from the beginning were eyewitnesses and ministered of the word, delivered them to us. So he's saying that the previous accounts that are already circulating, these are from people that were eyewitnesses. So again, he's not saying that these sources are not good. He's saying that these are good sources, and he's actually utilizing some of those sources to complete his narrative. And having a perfect understanding of all things from the very first, to write to you an orderly account. So he's taking it and he's writing it in an interesting way. So his book, when you study it through, let me just read to you exactly what it says in my Bible, study Bible, because it's super interesting. It says, when it says in 1:3, it says, this is what it says in the study Bible. It seemed good to me also. So that they're quoting that verse in 1:3. So it says, Luke did not express dissatisfaction with previous narratives of Jesus' ministry, but he identified with those who went before him, having had perfect understanding, the ones who went before him. This phrase represents two of the four characteristics that describe Luke's work in this verse. Luke investigated his topic, and he did it with care. He did not claim to know everything about Jesus, but what he described was studied and treated accurately. Then it's saying of all things. So when he says in the verse of all things, the third characteristic of Luke's works was its thoroughness. And it says from the very first. So he says from the very first. And they're saying the fourth characteristic of Luke was his interest in even the earliest events tied to Jesus' life, an orderly account. So he's speaking about things that from the very beginning of Jesus' life. Luke gave his narrative a basic structure. Not every part is in chronological sequence, but the broad sequence is Christ's ministry in Galilee, his travel to Jerusalem, and his struggles in Jerusalem. The order of events described by Luke shows how Jesus gradually revealed himself and how the opposition of him grew. So this is a powerful beginning of the book of Luke. So there leaves no doubt in people's mind of his sources, who he was, and again, like I said, he's recognized in other books of the New Testament that, he's a legitimate apostle. He's not an apostle, because an apostle is someone who actually saw Jesus, but he's a legitimate leader of the new church, and traveled with Paul. He's mentioned by Paul by name. So then it goes on. So now we're only in verse 5. It says, there was in the days of Herod, the king of Judea, a certain priest named Zacharias of the division of Abijah. His wife was of the daughters of Aaron, and her name was Elizabeth. So now he's going on to describe, he's not even talking about Jesus here yet. Okay, so he's describing an event he's describing the parents of John and how this begins, and he's giving time frames, right? So right in the beginning it says, there was in the days of Herod, the king of Judea, a certain priest named Zacharias of the division of Abijah. So people that study history can recognize exactly when that time frame was, when Herod was in power. And they were both righteous before God, walking in all the commandments and ordinances of the Lord, blameless. But they had no child because Elizabeth was barren, and they were both well advanced in years. So it was while he was serving as priest before God in the order of his division, according to the custom of the priesthood, his lot fell to burn incense when he went into the temple of the Lord. And the whole multitude of the people was out praying outside at the hour of incense. Then an angel of the Lord appeared to him, standing on the right side of the altar of incense. And when Zacharias saw him, he was troubled, and fear fell upon him. Okay, so there's, again, a ton of information just in that one little section. We're not even into the book of Luke yet. We're just beginning the book of Luke. So, you know how in Chronicles we're studying how the priests were set up and how they were all designated by David in First Chronicles, how they would do this, the time frame. So this describes him following that same time frame, right? So here we are all the way in the book of Luke, and prior to the birth of Jesus, and all of those functions that David had set up, the way they were originally initiated in Moses' time, but David finalized them and organized them. And I'm running out of time, so I'm going to do a second video. But you see right here that he is following those ordinances, and it's his term, according to the priesthood, to go in. Okay, so this is one. I'm going to do two here in just a second. Jesus is coming. Read your Bible. Hang tight for number 2.